The strange signal arrived on an ordinary morning when most people across human space were busy with their usual routines. No one expected something unusual to happen, least of all the workers at the Deep Space Listening Station near the edge of the Orion Spur. The station crew usually heard only regular star noise, harmless static, and the occasional friendly communication from travelers. But on this particular day, a repeating pattern appeared on their screensoft, rhythmic and clearly not natural. At first, the crew thought it was some kind of system glitch. They restarted their programs, checked their instruments, and even cleaned the receivers, thinking maybe dust or a loose wire had caused the disturbance. But the signal kept returning, steady and patient, almost as if it knew someone was listening. The crew leader, an older officer who had worked in space communication for decades, leaned closer to the glowing display and frowned. The pulse wasn't just repeating, it had structure. It rose, dipped, paused, and repeated again with the exact same timing. Nothing in nature behaved that neatly. And when they zoomed in on the waveform, there were subtle variations inside the sound, like coded patterns waiting to be understood. The discovery spread quickly. Scientists from different sectors were contacted. Mathematicians, cryptographers, linguists, and astrophysicists worked together to examine the mysterious message. News of the signal even leaked out to certain corners of human space, causing excitement among explorers and researchers. There had been rumors for years that humans might not be alone in the universe, but no one had concrete proof. This new pattern felt different. It felt purposeful. As more experts studied it, one detail became clear. The signal had traveled from far beyond any charted star map. Even fast ships would need months to reach the coordinates. But what truly captured everyone's attention was the structure hidden inside the signal. After days of work, the research team finally agreed on the most likely interpretation. The signal was a distress call, a kind of interstellar SOS. The announcement created a wave of debate at the High Command headquarters. The council hall, usually calm and organized, filled with arguments. Some leaders believed humanity should answer the call. Helping others was part of their identity, part of their values that had been carried from old Earth into the stars. Others, however, were cautious. They argued that no one knew who or what had sent the message. It could be a trap. It could be dangerous. It could simply be too far away to risk sending an entire fleet. The discussions continued for hours, stretching into the evening. Finally, the council reviewed archived documents from early human space exploration. These old records described how humanity, despite many challenges, always extended a hand when someone needed help. Generations before had written that if humanity ever met another form of life, their first act should be one of kindness. That idea carried a lot of weight. Slowly, one by one, the voices in the room shifted. The tone changed from hesitation to responsibility. After all, if the situation were reversed, if humans were the ones sending a distress call, wouldn't they hope someone would respond? With that thought, the decision was made. Humanity would send assistance. The question now was which fleet would be suitable for such a long and unpredictable mission. The answer came quickly. The Deathworlder Expeditionary Fleet, often called simply the Expedition Fleet, was designed for the harshest and most unstable environments ever encountered. The fleet's ships were sturdy, reliable, and built to withstand unknown conditions. They weren't built for war, but for endurance, survival, and exploration. Their crews were trained to adapt to strange ecosystems, unfamiliar climates, and unexpected challenges. The person chosen to lead the mission was a steady and thoughtful commander known for his calm decision-making. He had guided teams through several difficult situations before and had earned respect across human space. People trusted him, not because he was fearless, but because he always thought ahead. He was the kind of leader who observed quietly before acting who studied every possibility and who made decisions based on reason rather than impulse. When he received the assignment, he didn't react with excitement or fear. Instead, he took a long moment to study the data packet handed to him. He reviewed the waveform analysis, the decoded fragments, the suggested route, and the possible risks. Only after understanding everything did he give a simple nod. He accepted the responsibility without hesitation, though he knew the journey would take them far from familiar territory. The fleet began preparations immediately. Engineers double-checked reactor systems. Technicians worked on communication arrays, knowing that maintaining contact across such a long distance would be a challenge. Medical teams stocked supplies for every possible scenario they could think of. The science officers loaded their equipment and updated their databases with every piece of information available about the signal. Meanwhile, the crew members packed personal items, wrote messages to their families, and tried to calm their nerves. Some of them were excited at the idea of discovering something new. Others were uneasy, unsure of what they might find. But most of them felt honored. They were being sent not to fight, but to help. That gave the mission a sense of purpose. As the departure day approached, the fleet gathered in orbit. Dozens of silver-white ships floated against the dark backdrop of space, their hulls polished and ready. The main command vessel stood at the center, steady and powerful. It would act as the heart of the operation, guiding the others through the vast empty distance. Before launch, the commander addressed the fleet through a calm communication broadcast. He reminded them that the mission was not about danger or glory. It was about hope that helping another life form, even one they had never met, was the right thing to do. His message was simple but reassuring. And when he finished, a quiet determination settled over the entire fleet. The final countdown began. Engines warmed with a dull vibration. Lights blinked across control panels. Pilots took their positions, securing belts and adjusting navigation settings. The stars outside the windows seemed to stand still, waiting for the moment the fleet would make its leap into the unknown. When the jump engines activated, the ship stretched into thin, glowing lines before disappearing into faster-than-light travel. The journey had officially begun. During the first few days, the crew settled into their routines. The trip would be long, so everyone focused on their roles. Some monitored communication systems, watching for shifts in the signal. Others reviewed the star maps repeatedly, memorizing the route. A few spent time in the observation decks, staring out at the silent beauty of deep space. Even far from home, the view of distant stars gave them comfort. As the fleet continued deeper into uncharted territory, small details began to feel strange. The signal grew slightly clearer the closer they traveled, but it also revealed certain patterns that researchers couldn't fully explain. Some parts of the waveform behaved oddly, almost as if a second unseen message was mixed into the original. But every time they tried to decode the extra layer, they ended up with meaningless noise. The commander noticed their concerns, but chose not to jump to conclusions. He reminded the team to stay calm and analyze everything carefully. By the time the fleet reached the midway point of the journey, the mood had shifted. No one felt frightened, but there was a subtle tension in the air. It was the kind of tension that comes when something doesn't quite add up, yet you can't point to anything clearly wrong. Even the crew members who were usually cheerful had quieter voices. More days passed. Slowly, the edges of the unknown star system came into view on their scopes. The fleet prepared to exit faster-than-light travel. Everyone was alert. Everyone was ready. They didn't know if they were about to meet a struggling civilization, a damaged ship, or something entirely unexpected. As the countdown to re-entry began, the commander stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind him. The room was silent except for the quiet beeping of the navigation console. The fleet had traveled farther than any human mission before. And now, after weeks of preparation and anticipation, they were finally about to see the source of the signal with their own eyes. When the ship slowed and real space came back into focus, the view before them was nothing like the crew had imagined. A star system lay ahead, but it felt strangely quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of activity, no lights, no movement, no communication. Everything looked still. The source of the signal was waiting somewhere in that silence. And the fleet, guided by hope and responsibility, moved forward to answer it. The fleet drifted slowly into the unfamiliar star system, and many of the crew felt a strange chill, even though the temperature inside their ships was perfectly controlled. They had expected noise, energy signatures, movement, or at least some sign of activity. But everything ahead of them looked calm, almost too calm, as if the entire place had been paused like a picture. The ships adjusted their course and moved closer to the central region of the system. Screens across the command bridge showed readings that didn't match any typical inhabited system. There was no communication network, no traffic patterns, no routine transmissions, not even the natural static that usually bounced around a busy star system. It felt like the whole place had gone quiet for a very long time. The science team studied the star at the system's center. It was stable, bright, and healthy. A star like that should have supported life around it, or at least some kind of activity. But nothing matched the neat, organized pattern of the distress signal that had drawn them here. For a moment, a few officers wondered if they had arrived too late. Perhaps whoever sent the message was already gone. That thought unsettled the crew, but no one said it out loud. As they moved deeper, something large appeared on the sensors. The fleet slowed automatically, and everyone leaned closer to their screens. The object was massive, much larger than any human-built station. It formed a wide circular structure, almost like a giant ring floating in space. Its surface was smooth, in some places and rough in others, with long curved lines that suggested it had once been a beautifully engineered habitat. Now, parts of it seemed dim or inactive. The commander asked for a visual display, and the main screen shifted to show the ring structure in clearer detail. Even though no one in the fleet had ever seen alien architecture before, they could tell immediately that this was not human-made. The design had a sort of artistic flow to it. The curves were elegant, the proportions were unfamiliar, and the materials reflected light in unusual patterns. Whoever had built it must have possessed a level of creativity and engineering ability that was both advanced and graceful, but the ring was not in perfect condition. Certain sections looked dark, as if their power had shut down long ago. Other parts seemed to sparkle faintly, suggesting there was still some life inside. A gentle, rhythmic flicker traveled along parts of the outer frame, almost like the last heartbeat of a sleeping machine. The fleet approached with caution. The commander instructed all ships to maintain a safe distance while the scout team gathered scans. The crew monitored energy readings, temperature changes, environmental signatures, and anything that might help them understand what they were looking at. The ring did show faint signs of atmosphere inside, but the readings were unusual thin in some areas, thicker in others, like something had disrupted the internal balance. A small shuttle team volunteered to approach the ring more closely. They prepared their equipment, checked their suits, and reviewed every safety instruction twice. No one wanted to take unnecessary risks, but they also felt a sense of responsibility. The distress signal had come from this direction, so whatever had happened inside the ring needed to be understood. As the shuttle glided toward a large opening on the structure's side, the crew inside felt a mix of excitement and worry. Through the front window, they could see the ring's interior, dimly lit by soft, pale light. The design inside was just as impressive as the exterior smooth pathways. curved walls and structures, shaped in ways humans had never imagined. Yet, everything seemed still, as if frozen in time. The shuttle parked near what looked like an access platform. The crew stepped out carefully, moving slowly as their boots touched the unfamiliar surface. The material under their feet felt solid, but slightly flexible, almost like it had once been warm or alive. The air inside the ring had oxygen, but the levels were uneven, so everyone kept their helmets on as they walked deeper. They observed the surroundings with silent curiosity. There were no signs of the original inhabitants, but the arrangement of structures suggested this place had once been lively. There were open areas that looked like gathering spaces, long corridors that might have been used for travel, and smooth panels that seemed designed for communication or control. The teams. Scanners picked up faint, unstable life signatures deeper inside the ring. They followed the trail carefully. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. The further they walked, the more they noticed small objects scattered around dropped tools, personal items, and pieces of unknown technology. Everything looked untouched, like the inhabitants had left in a hurry. A moment later, one of the explorers paused. They noticed a transparent chamber along the wall, shaped like a tall pod with a soft glow inside. A pod was still active. The team approached and saw something resting inside it, something that resembled a living being, though its features were unfamiliar. It was lying peacefully with a calm expression, as if in a deep sleep. The readings confirmed that the being was still alive, though its energy levels were extremely low. The team immediately reported the discovery to the commander. This was a major turning point in the mission. Everything they had seen so far had been mysterious and empty, but now they had found someone, perhaps a survivor of whatever event had happened here. The commander listened carefully to the report and instructed the team to proceed with respect and caution. The being inside the pod might have been the one who sent the signal, or perhaps someone connected to the event. They needed to treat the situation gently and avoid disturbing anything unnecessarily. The team examined the pod, trying to understand its design. It seemed to be a stasis chamber of some kind, meant to preserve the being inside. There were soft lights along the edges and gentle pulses that looked like they were monitoring health conditions. Their equipment confirmed that the being was in a stable state, though its life signs had weakened over time. One of the explorers noticed something else. The pattern of light on the pod's surface almost matched the pattern of the distress signal. They had decoded. It wasn't identical, but there were similarities, as if the signal had been sent using the pod's technology. That meant this being might indeed be the one who cried for help, just as the team prepared to gently move the pod. Toward the shuttle, the lights inside the ring flickered unexpectedly. For a moment, every structure around them pulsed with a faint glow, as if waking up from a long sleep. The team stood still, unsure of what triggered the change. The glow wasn't bright or threatening, just a soft shimmer that moved along this. Walls, floor, and ceiling. The commander, watching everything through the team's helmet cameras, asked for updates. The crew tried to remain calm as they checked their surroundings. Nothing harmful was happening, but the activation of the lights felt deliberate, almost like the ring recognized their presence. More readings appeared on the explorer's scanner's energy, waves shifting through the environment. The activity didn't seem aggressive. Instead, it felt like some kind of automated system responding to new visitors. But because the ring had been quiet for so long, even this gentle reaction felt surprising. The team decided to continue with their work. They secured the stasis pod, making sure it was stable for transport. The soft glow of the pod's surface increased slightly, and for a second, the being inside seemed to stir, reacting to the change of environment. The movement was small, but enough to remind everyone that this wasn't just a mystery. They had found someone alive, someone who had possibly been waiting for help, as they began the slow walk back toward the shuttle. The ring's lights continued to flicker in unpredictable patterns. The crew didn't feel threatened, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the place was slowly reawakening. Whether this was a good sign or not remained unclear. When the team finally reached their shuttle and secured the pod inside, they took one last look at the enormous structure around them. It was beautiful, mysterious, and full of secrets. And now, with the survivor discovered, those secrets felt closer to being uncovered. The shuttle lifted off and headed back toward the main fleet, carrying the single being who might hold the answers to everything. No one knew what they would learn or what story the survivor would tell. But one thing was certain. The journey had just taken a turn no one could have predicted, and the silence of the star system no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of something much larger. When the shuttle returned to the fleet with the mysterious stasis pod on board, everyone felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. They had finally found a living survivor in the silent alien ring, but no one knew what this being had gone through, or how long it had been asleep. The main command ship prepared a special medical room to receive the pod, with teams from science, health, and language departments waiting inside. They moved carefully, making sure the transition from shuttle to ship was smooth and gentle. When the pod was placed on the platform in the medical room, the soft glow from its surface flickered in a way that almost felt emotional, like it recognized that help had finally arrived. The being inside remained still, resting peacefully with a calm expression. Its features were unfamiliar but delicate, giving the sense of a gentle life rather than anything threatening. The commander watched everything through a large transparent screen. His expression was thoughtful and controlled, but those who knew him well could tell he felt the weight of the situation. He understood that whoever this being was, their story might explain the strange silence of the entire star system. The science team began scanning the pod more closely. The results showed that it was indeed a stasis chamber designed to keep the being alive during emergencies. The energy source was running low, but still functioning. The life signs, although weak, were stable. There was no sign of injury, only exhaustion, as if the being had been asleep for far longer than anyone could imagine. One of the scientists noticed something unusual. The inner pattern of the pod's energy seemed linked to the same rhythmic design found in the distress signal. It wasn't an exact match, but close enough to suggest the technology was related. This meant the SOS message likely came from the ring's systems, possibly triggered when the pod entered emergency mode. The commander nodded as he listened to the report, but something still bothered him. If the pod had sent the signal, why? Was the ring so quiet? Why were there no other survivors? And what had happened to the beautiful structures that looked like they had once held life and activity? He ordered the communication team to scan the pod for any message storage units. Many advanced civilizations recorded information inside emergency escape devices, hoping rescuers would learn what had gone wrong. After several minutes of careful inspection, the team located a small data module attached to the base of the pod. But when they tried to read it, the module produced only static and flickering symbols. Something had corrupted the information dot just then. The lights in the medical room dimmed slightly, and the pod released a soft tone, almost like a sigh. Everyone paused. The being inside shifted gently, their eyes moving beneath their closed lids. It wasn't awakening fully, but more like reacting to the environment. A quiet sound escaped their lips, not a clear word, just a soft murmur of emotion. The commander stepped closer, lowering his voice as he addressed the team. He instructed them not to rush anything. The being needed rest, and whatever story they carried shouldn't be forced out. They would awaken naturally when their body was ready. The decision settled the room. Some of the crew took a moment to simply observe the pod. They felt a sense of responsibility toward the survivor, especially. After traveling such a long distance to help, no one knew who they were, but one truth was clear: they had suffered something difficult, something big enough to silence an entire star system. Over the next several hours, the fleet continued to study the ring structure from afar. The large habitat remained still, showing no new signs of movement, but occasional faint pulses of energy radiated from deep inside it. The lights that had flickered earlier didn't appear again, leaving some crew members unsure if they had imagined it. Inside the command room, the main team gathered to discuss their findings. The star maps showed the ring was placed perfectly in orbit, suggesting it had once been a well-organized community hub. The location made sense for a peaceful civilization, a stable star, plenty of resources, and comfortable temperatures. But the absence of life didn't match the ideal conditions. One of the analysts brought up a theory. She pointed out that the signal had two layers: an outer pattern that clearly said, "Need help," and an inner pattern that seemed irregular. They hadn't decoded the second layer yet. It might have been a secondary message, or something added. Unintentionally, during the sending process, the commander leaned closer, asking whether the inner layer could be some kind of warning. The analyst hesitated. It was possible, she said, but without more information, they couldn't be certain. The irregular pattern might have been damaged by time, distance, or interference. The room grew quiet as everyone considered that possibility. A distress signal could be a call for help, but a hidden layer of unknown code, that could mean anything. Later that day, the commander visited the medical room again. The soft glow of the pod had dimmed, but the being inside appeared slightly more relaxed. Their breathing was deeper, and their fingers twitched occasionally. The medical team monitored their progress closely. They reported that the being's body showed signs of extreme fatigue, possibly from long-term stasis, but otherwise seemed healthy. One of the medics commented quietly that the being looked peaceful, which was surprising given the strange emptiness of the ring. That small detail made the commander think. Someone who had just survived a major disaster wouldn't normally rest so calmly unless they trusted the technology keeping them alive. This made him even more curious. The ring seemed abandoned, yet the pod was still functional. Had someone set it up deliberately? Had someone chosen to preserve this being while everything else around them went silent? As the commander stood there, lost in thought, the soft hum of the ship changed slightly, a quiet alert signal. It wasn't urgent, but enough to draw everyone's attention. The communication team called through the intercom, explaining that they had received a tiny, faint pulse of energy from the ring. It didn't match the distress signal, but it wasn't random either. It looked like a short activation of something inside the structure. The commander returned to the bridge immediately. The crew replayed the signal. It was a single pulse with a smooth tone, almost gentle. But it came from deep inside the ring, far below the surface where the explorers had walked. The tone repeated again, slightly stronger. A scientist suggested it might be an automated system responding to the fleet's presence, perhaps reactivating slowly after being dormant for a long time. But another team member raised a different possibility, that the ring detected the movement of the stasis pod, and whatever system was linked to it was trying to reconnect. The commander listened to every theory carefully. None of the possibilities felt dangerous, but everything felt too uncertain to ignore. He ordered the fleet to increase their distance from the ring slightly, just as a precaution. The ships moved into a wider circle, leaving enough room to monitor the structure without getting too close. As the fleet repositioned, another alert appeared on the screens. This time, it was the inner layer of the original distress signal. The analysts had been working quietly on it all day, and they had finally managed to decode a tiny portion. The inner message wasn't complete, and the majority of it still looked distorted, but one part was clear enough to interpret. The partial translation said, "Please, do not." The words ended abruptly. The rest was unreadable. The room fell into silence. The message didn't say what they shouldn't do. It could have been anything. Please do not enter. Please do not respond. Please do not approach. Please do not trigger something. The uncertainty made the commander uneasy. For the first time since the mission began, he felt the weight of a decision they had already made. They had answered the signal. They had entered the system. They had approached the ring. And they had removed the stasis pod. What if the message had been something else entirely, something they didn't fully understand? He refused to jump to fearful conclusions. Instead, he instructed the team to continue decoding. They needed more clarity before making assumptions. Meanwhile, back in the medical room, a soft sound echoed inside the pod. The being's eyes opened. Slightly, the first real sign of awakening since their rescue. Their gaze was unfocused at first, moving slowly as if adjusting to light after a long dream. A medic approached carefully, speaking in a calm, gentle tone. Even though they didn't know the language of the being, they hoped the soft voice would bring comfort. The being's eyes tracked the movement, showing awareness. Then something unexpected happened. Their lips moved, forming a sound that was faint but clear enough to hear. It was a short phrase, spoken in a trembling voice. It carried more emotion. Then clarity. The word sounded almost like run. The medic froze, unsure if they had heard correctly. The being tried to speak again, but their strength faded quickly. Their eyes closed once more, falling back into a deep sleep. The message was repeated to the commander immediately. He listened in silence, staring at the display showing the sleeping survivor. The partially decoded signal said, "Please do not." The being whispered something that sounded like run. Nothing yet made sense. But one thing was certain: the mystery behind the ring, the signal, and the silent star system was deeper than anyone had imagined, and the fleet had already stepped far inside it. The mood across the fleet changed completely after the being in the stasis pod whispered that single word. Nobody could forget it. People repeated it quietly in different corners of the ship, wondering if they had heard correctly. Some thought the being meant something else, maybe a sound that simply sounded like run. Others believed it was a clear warning. But the truth was, no one knew for sure. The commander spent that entire night cautiously reviewing all recordings from the medical room. He watched the faint movements of the being's lips again and again. The whisper was soft, fragile, almost like someone speaking while half asleep. But the expression on their face carried fear, not confusion. And fear didn't usually come from a dream. The crew tried to continue their usual duties, but the atmosphere felt different. People had trouble focusing. Some stared out the windows toward the giant ring in the distance, wondering what had happened there. The ring looked peaceful from afar, with its enormous curved frame reflecting soft starlight. But now the silence no longer felt calm. It felt like something unspoken was hiding behind it. The analysts continued their work on decoding the distress signal. They played the inner layer again and again, hoping for new clues. The same fragmented line remained: "Please, do not." But the rest of the message was still scrambled, like broken pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. The commander gathered the officers for a meeting. The room felt unusually quiet. Everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. The commander asked each department for updates, hoping someone had discovered something helpful. The science team reported that the faint pulses coming from the ring had grown slightly stronger, though still harmless. They believed some automated systems inside the ring were reactivating slowly, perhaps because the fleet had arrived. They said this calmly, but the commander could hear the uncertainty beneath their words. The communication team had tried connecting to the ring again using soft Harmless signals. Instead of responding with a message, the ring returned small, random flickers, almost like a system waking up, but not yet able to speak. The medical team also shared updates. The being inside the pod was resting normally, with stable life signs. They monitored every change carefully. The being seemed peaceful, but their breathing occasionally quickened, as if reacting to memories. The medics agreed that waking them up forcefully could be dangerous. They needed natural recovery. After hearing all of this, the commander stayed quiet for a long moment, thinking. He decided they needed more clarity before making any big decisions. The fleet had to understand the ring better, understand the distress signal better, and understand the being's warning. If it really was a warning, he instructed a second exploration team to prepare for a remote scan of the ring's inner layers. This team would not land. Instead, they would use long-distance scanners from a safe distance to map the deeper parts of the structure. This way, they wouldn't disturb anything by accident. Hours later, the scan began. The results came in slowly, forming a detailed map of the ring's interior. At first, everything looked normal: large living areas, walkways, transportation routes, and energy lines. But deeper inside, the map became harder to read. Some sections were blurred, as if the scanner had trouble seeing through the walls. Other parts reflected signals back in strange ways. Then something unexpected appeared: a cluster of energy readings deep inside the ring's center. They weren't strong, but they were organized, almost like a pattern. The readings pulsed slowly, reminding the analysts of a heartbeat. The commander asked if it could be a power core. The analysts weren't sure. It could be an old reactor waking up, a communication hub restarting, or something entirely different. The only certainty was that the pulse resembled the faint energy the fleet had been detecting earlier. While the team tried to understand these readings, the lights across several ships flickered for a brief second. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft dimming and return. But it was enough to cause wide eyes across the fleet. The engineering teams checked all systems. They found nothing wrong. No overheating, no energy drains, no faulty cables. Everything was running smoothly. But when they compared the timing of the flicker to the ring's pulse, they realized both events happened at the exact same moment. The commander didn't like coincidences, especially in a place filled with unknowns. He ordered the fleet to power down any unnecessary systems, hoping to make their energy signature smaller. If the ring was reacting to them, it would be safer not to overwhelm it. The ships dimmed lights, reduced engine output, and switched non-critical systems to standby. The atmosphere across the fleet grew softer, quieter. It felt like the entire fleet was holding its breath. Later that evening, the medical room reported another update. The being in the pod had stirred again. Their eyes opened for a longer moment this time. They looked around slowly, confused, but aware. A medic spoke gently, trying to offer reassurance, even though they didn't share a language. The being tried to speak, but struggled. Their voice was too weak, and the words came out soft and broken. But one phrase was clearer than before. Even if only partly understandable, the being said something that sounded like, "It is here." The medic felt a chill, but stayed calm. They asked softly, "What is here? Can you understand us?" The being's eyes fluttered, and they struggled to stay awake. Their hand lifted slightly, trembling, trying to point upward or maybe outward. But their strength faded again, and they fell back into sleep before finishing their sentence. The medic repeated the message to the commander right away. The pause on the other end of the intercom made it clear the commander was thinking hard. Next morning, the fleet noticed another strange change. The ring emitted a new signal, not a distress call, not a warning, but a soft, steady hum. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, like background music in a quiet room. It felt intentional, almost like the ring was trying to communicate. not with words, but with presence. The analysts listened to the hum carefully. The pattern didn't match anything in human communication. It wasn't chaotic either. It was rhythmic, slow, and oddly calming. One crew member joked nervously that maybe the ring knew they were watching and didn't want to appear unfriendly. The commander didn't smile at the joke, but he didn't dismiss it either. Sometimes, even strange things could have simple explanations. But a few hours later, the calm rhythm shifted. The hum grew slightly louder, then softer, then quiet again. The shift repeated in uneven patterns. The analysts studied the new waveforms and realized the pulse resembled attempts at speech, almost like a voice clearing its throat, trying to form words. When they placed the signal through a translator program, it produced nothing meaningful. But the shape of the wave looked strangely familiar. The inner layer of the distress signal had a similar shape that made the commander stop what he was doing. He asked the analysts to overlay both signals. When they did, the resemblance became impossible to ignore. The hum coming from the ring was a slow, imperfect version of the pattern hidden inside the original SOS dot. The partially decoded message had said, "Please, do not." What if the rest of the message was somehow connected to this pulse? Before the team could explore further, the fleet's communication systems froze for a brief second. Screens flickered, then returned to normal. Computers restarted, automatically following their safety protocols. Nothing appeared damaged, but the log showed something odd. A packet of unknown code had passed through the system for a fraction of a second. It didn't harm anything. It didn't change anything. It simply flowed through, like a soft breeze moving across a quiet room. The engineers studied the packet. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't harmful. But it also didn't belong. The commander immediately ordered a full diagnostic. He didn't want to take chances. Even though nothing bad had happened, the timing was too close to the ring's pulse. The ships checked everything: memory logs, navigation systems, engine control, life support. Everything was functioning perfectly. But the engineers noticed a tiny irregularity in the navigation system. A single thread of code had duplicated itself in the outer layer. It wasn't doing anything harmful. It wasn't connected to major functions. It was just there. They erased it easily. But the presence of that small line of code, so small it could have been overlooked, made the commander uneasy. He asked how it got there. The engineers couldn't answer. Meanwhile, the being in the medical room began breathing faster, as if reacting to something unseen. The pod readjusted its internal settings automatically, stabilizing the being's condition. But the medics noticed small movements: hands clenching slightly, head turning, eyebrows tensing. It looked like the being was dreaming, but the dream didn't seem peaceful. One of the medics leaned closer, trying to understand. The being whispered something, barely audible. A single word again. Not run this time, not here. But something softer and sadder. They whispered, sorry. Before the medic could ask anything, the being fell silent again. The commander stood outside the medical room, watching through the glass. His thoughts were heavy. Whatever had happened in the ring, the silence, the pulses, the hidden message, was more complicated than they had expected. Back on the bridge, the analyst working on the original distress signal suddenly gasped. She called the commander over, pointing at the screen with wide eyes. The inner. The bridge felt unusually still after the words appeared on the screen. Every person in the room stared at the message in silence. It felt like the entire fleet had reached a moment where no one wanted to breathe too loudly. The commander, read the newly decoded line again and again, unable to shake the chill running through him. Please, do not follow. That was the message hidden in the inner layer of the distress call. A warning, not a request for help. A message meant to stop someone from coming here. A message that the fleet had arrived too late to understand. But now, they were here surrounded by the massive ring, floating inside a system that had clearly gone through something no one fully understood. The commander stood very still, his mind filling with questions that had no answers. If the warning was genuine, then what had happened to the original builders of the ring? What danger had they tried to escape? What had they begged others not to follow toward? And most importantly, was the danger still here? The analysts kept studying the original signal, hoping to uncover something more, maybe another word, another clue. But the rest remained scrambled, as if the message had been damaged beyond repair. The team tried every technique they knew, but nothing else came. Out. The warning seemed complete now, simple, short, and troubling. Outside the ship, the ring floated quietly, glowing softly in the darkness. It didn't look threatening. It didn't move. It didn't send out strong signals. It just existed, like a peaceful monument drifting in space. But knowing what the message said made every gentle pulse feel more mysterious, and every faint flicker seem more deliberate. The commander asked the science team to focus all remaining scanners on the rings, center where the strange heartbeat-like readings had come from. Maybe the deeper parts held the secret behind the warning. Hours passed. The team watched the readings very closely. The pulsing energy remained soft, stable, and slow. But something new appeared in the data. Something small, very faint, but noticeable. Enough to raise concern. There was movement. Not physical movement. No panels were shifting. No structures were opening. But the energy inside the center of the ring seemed to ripple, like gentle waves across a pond. The ripples weren't strong, enough to cause harm, but they had a pattern that repeated in slow cycles. One of the analysts pointed at the screen and whispered that the pattern looked like the same rhythm as the hum the ring had emitted earlier. The commander asked if it could be communication. The analyst nodded carefully, unsure but open to the possibility. If the ring was communicating, the next question was, what did it want to say? Meanwhile, the being in the medical room slowly regained more awareness. Their breathing had strengthened. Their eyes stayed open longer. They still looked exhausted, but more present. The medic stayed gentle, speaking softly, offering water, and calm gestures, even though they knew the being couldn't understand the words. At one point, the being lifted their hand with effort and traced a small circle in the air. The medic followed the movement with their eyes, unsure of the meaning. The being repeated the circle again, this time slower. Their expression showed a mixture of sadness and regret. The medic asked if they meant the ring outside. The being closed their eyes once and opened them slowly again, almost like a weak nod. The medic asked quietly, "Is the ring dangerous?" The being looked toward the ceiling, breathing softly. Their lips moved, forming weak sounds that barely carried across the room. The medics leaned in closer, careful not to startle them. The being whispered something that sounded like, "Not now, but was." The commander received the update immediately. Those few words echoed in his mind. Not now, but was. It meant the danger was in the past. But what kind of past danger could leave an entire ring abandoned, send out a warning, not to follow, and leave only a single survivor drifting alone? The commander realized the being might be the only hope of understanding everything. But they were still too weak to speak for long. Pushing them could cause harm. So he ordered the medics to let the being wait naturally, and only speak when they had strength. There was no rush, at least not yet. Outside, the ring continued emitting its gentle hum. The sound had changed slightly. It now had a comforting tone to it, almost like a soft melody. People across the fleet listened through speakers, feeling a strange calm from it. Some said it sounded like a choir far away. Others said it felt like someone humming through a long hall. No one could pinpoint the exact emotion the sound carried, but it didn't feel hostile. In the command room, one of the analysts discovered something unexpected. When they compared the hum to the original distress signal, they saw that the two waveforms matched in a peculiar way. If the hum was slowed down significantly, parts of it resembled the same shapes found in the warning message. The analyst presented the findings to the commander. She believed the ring itself was repeating the message, not in words, but in pulse patterns. In other words, the ring had continued the warning long after the builders had vanished. The commander decided to test something. He instructed the communication team to send a soft reply to the ring, not in human language, but in simple energy pulses. A slow, gentle sequence of 3 beats. A universal pattern meaning, "We hear you." The signal went out. There was a long pause, and the ring responded with the same 3-beat pattern, slower and calmer. The communication team stared at the screen, stunned. The commander felt a deep mix of relief and tension. The ring wasn't just a structure. It was listening. It was aware. It was trying to communicate in the only way it still could. The commander asked the analysts to send another pulse sequence, this time a pattern asking if the ring was stable. A cautious question, not too complex. Ring responded with a soft rise in its hum, followed by a steady wave back. The interpreters believed it meant yes, or something close to it. At the very least, it didn't indicate danger. Next, the analysts tried a simple question. "Are you alone?" This time the response came slower. The hum shifted into a long, low tone that carried a feel of sadness. It wasn't a word, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. The ring was alone. It had been alone for a long time. The commander looked out at the giant structure, imagining what it had once been. A home, maybe. A place full of life. A meeting point for an entire civilization. Now it was just a memory drifting through space, repeating a warning to anyone who might stumble across it. Later that day, the being in the medical room woke again. It looked more alert. The medics gently helped them sit up slightly. The being's eyes shifted across the room, then toward a small window, showing the faint outline of the ring outside. After a moment of quiet, the being whispered something very soft. The medics leaned in again. This time the being said, "We tried to stop it," the medic asked quietly. "Stop what?" The being closed their eyes, breathing slowly, trying to gather strength. After a few seconds, they whispered one more sentence. Something we made. The words struck the commander deeply when he heard them. A danger created by the ring's own builders. A threat so strong they sent a warning across the stars, begging others not to follow. A message buried inside a distress call. A survivor left drifting in a pod. A whole civilization quiet and gone. But if the threat had been something they made, what had happened to it? The science team gave the answer without even knowing it. Later that evening, they announced that the pulses from the center of the ring had faded significantly. The energy readings were dropping, slowly but steadily. Whatever had been active inside the core was finally shutting down. It wasn't growing. It wasn't spreading. It was fading, like an old engine running out of power. The commander realized the truth. The threat wasn't coming back. Whatever had happened long ago was over. The ring had survived only as a memory of a difficult past, still trying to warn others, even when no danger remained. The being in the medical room spent the next many hours drifting in and out of sleep. When they were awake, they seemed calmer. Their fear had softened. They no longer whispered warnings, but simply rested with quiet relief on their face. The commander decided the fleet would leave the system slowly and respectfully. They had come because they believed someone needed help. They had followed a signal without knowing the risk. But they had learned the truth and honored the message left behind. Before leaving, the commander ordered one final transmission toward the ring, a gentle pulse sequence meaning, "We understand. Thank you." The ring responded with a soft hum that lasted a long time, almost like a farewell dot. As the fleet drifted away from the system, the ring slowly became a small distant shape, then a faint dot, then nothing more than a memory itself. No danger had followed them. No threat chased them. But the story of the ring, its creators, their warning, their final message remained in the hearts of everyone who learned it. And even though none of the original builders survived to tell their story, the lonely ring had spoken for them, and humanity had listened.